am the ghost of Christmas past.
Mercy, why do spirits walk the earth, and why do they come to me?
A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us.
Ebenezer Scrooge.
In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley.
I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry.
Woe is me.
Bah! Humbug!
I have endeavored in this ghostly little book to raise the ghost of an idea which shall not put my readers out of humor with themselves, with the season, or with me. May it haunt their houses pleasantly. Their faithful friend and servant, Charles Dickens, December 1843. Funding for Bah Humbug is provided by the Sherman Fairchild Foundation, Betty Wold Johnson, and by the agents and employees of New York Life, who are proud to sponsor this evening's celebration of Dickens' Christmas classic. May you keep Christmas well. From all of us at New York Life, the company you keep.
Marley was dead. To begin with, there was no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon the exchange for anything he chose to put his name to. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead? Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole assign, his sole residuary legatee, his sole friend, and his sole mourner. And even Scrooge was not so dreadfully cut up by the sad event, but that he was an excellent man of business on the very day of the funeral, and solemnized it with an undoubted bargain. The mention of Marley's funeral brings me back to the point I started from. There is no doubt that Marley was dead. This must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come of the story I am going to relate.
Something wonderful did come of the story Charles Dickens related. Almost from the moment A Christmas Carol was published just over 150 years ago, it became the best known and the best loved of all the Christmas stories in the English language. It's not just a Christmas story, of course. It's a ghost story. Charles Dickens made that quite clear in the preface you heard at the beginning. And that ghost of an idea, he mentioned, is nothing less than a crusade against poverty and ignorance and selfishness, which is why it speaks to us today just as loudly as it spoke to our forefathers. In the next 60 minutes, we'll retell parts of A Christmas Carol in Dickens' own words. And every now and then, we'll take the liberty of interrupting Mr. Dickens' story to look at some of the background to this little book that Dickens himself called a sledgehammer. Charles Dickens gave many public readings of A Christmas Carol to audiences like this one, and he was very good at it, and he certainly enjoyed it a lot. So I think he'd be pleased that we have two actors as distinguished as James Earl Jones and Martin Sheen. They will, in a manner of speaking, stand in for Mr. Dickens tonight. But just before we go back to them, I want to show you something. This building we're in is the Pierpont Morgan Library in Midtown Manhattan. The library built at the beginning of this century by the great financier and collector J.P. Morgan. This room was his original library, and it houses one of the world's great collections of manuscripts, rare books, drawings, and other treasures. And the reason we're here is this: the original manuscript of A Christmas Carol, which is part of the Morgan collection. These are the opening words you've just heard. Marley was dead, to begin with. And these are the famous words we'll come to in a minute. Bah, said Scrooge. Humbug. You can see they were an afterthought, put in over a crossing out. This is another version of A Christmas Carol. It's called the prompt copy because it's the version Dickens himself edited and used for his public readings in Britain and the United States. For these public readings, Dickens always used the same desk. It went everywhere with him, and the same arrangement of gas pipes, which he designed himself to provide the stage lighting. And wherever he went, it was always A Christmas Carol that audiences most wanted to hear. So Marley was dead. He's been dead 7 years. Now Dickens tells us the fearful story of Ebenezer Scrooge.
Once upon a time, of all the good days of the year, on Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was cold, bleak, biting weather, foggy withal. The city clocks had only just gone 3, but it was quite dark already. It had not been bright all day, and candles were flaring in the windows of neighboring offices, like ruddy smears on the palpable brown air. The door of Scrooge's counting house was open, that he might keep his eye upon his clerk, who, in a dismal little cell beyond, a sort of tank, was copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so very much smaller that it looked like one coal. But he couldn't replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room, and so surely as the clerk came in with the shovel, the master predicted that it would be necessary for them to part. Wherefore the clerk put on his white comforter and tried to warm himself at the candle, in which effort, not being a man of strong imagination, he failed. "A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!" It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly that it was the first intimation he had of his approach.
Bah! Humbug!
"Christmas? A humbug, Uncle? You don't mean that, I'm sure."
I do. Merry Christmas. What right have you to be merry? You're poor enough.
Come then, what right have you to be dismal? What reason have you to be morose? You're rich enough.
Bah! Humbug!
Don't be cross, Uncle.
What else can I be when I live in such a world of fools as this? Merry Christmas. What's Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills without money? A time for finding yourself a year older and not an hour richer? If I could work my will, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and burned with a stick of holly through his heart. He should.
Uncle.
Nephew, keep Christmas in your own way and let me keep it in mine.
Keep it, but you don't keep it.
Let me leave it alone then. Much good it may do you, much good it has ever done you.
Don't be angry, Uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow.
Scrooge said he would see him in, yes indeed he did. He went the whole length of the expression and said that he would see him in that extremity first.
But why? Why?
Why did you get married?
Because I fell in love.
Because you fell in love. Good afternoon.
His nephew left the room without an angry word, notwithstanding. He stopped at the outer door to bestow the greetings of the season on the clerk, who, cold as he was warmer than Scrooge, for he returned them cordially.
There's another fella. My clerk, with 15 shillings a week and a wife and family, talking about Merry Christmas. I'll retire to Bedlam.
This lunatic, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, had let 2 other people in. They were portly gentlemen, pleasant to behold, and now stood with their hats off in Scrooge's office. They had books and papers in their hands and bowed to him. "Scrooge and Marley's, I believe. Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley?"
Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years. He died 7 years ago this very night.
We have no doubt his liberality is well represented by his surviving partner.
At the ominous word liberality, Scrooge frowned and shook his head.
At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, it is more than usually desirable that we make some slight provision for the poor and destitute who suffer greatly at the present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessities. Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comforts, sir.
Are there no prisons?
Plenty of prisons.
And the union house, workhouses, are they still in operation?
They are. I wish I could say they were not.
The treadmill and the poor law are in full vigor then?
Both very busy, sir.
Oh, I was afraid from what you said at first that something had occurred to stop them in their useful course. I'm very glad to hear it.
Under the impression that they scarcely furnish Christmas cheer of mind or body to the multitude, a few of us are endeavoring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and means of warmth. We chose this time because it is, of all others, when want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices. What shall we put you down for?
Nothing.
You wish to be anonymous?
I wish to be left alone. Since you asked me what I wish, gentlemen, that is my answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help to support the prisons and the workhouses. They cost enough. And those who are badly off must go there.
But many can't go there, and many would rather die.
If they would rather die, they had better do it and decrease the surplus population.
Seeing clearly that it would be useless to pursue their point, the gentleman withdrew. Scrooge resumed his labor with an improved opinion of himself and a more facetious temper than was usually with him. At length, the hour of shutting up the counting house arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge, dismounting from his stool, tacitly admitted the fact to the expectant clerk in the tank, who instantly snuffed out his candle and put on his hat.
You want all day tomorrow, I suppose?
If quite convenient, sir.
It's not convenient, and it's not fair. If I was to stop half a crown for it, you'd think yourself mightily ill-used, I'll be bound.
Yes, sir.
And yet you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wage and for no work.
It's only once a year, sir.
Now, poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier next morning.
Dickens himself called A Christmas Carol The Sledgehammer. When he wrote it, he was 31 years old and already a famous novelist. But he was angry. What made him angry was the poverty he saw all around him in cities like London and Manchester. He was angry at the pathetic resources of the ragged schools, the charitable schools at which the poorest children were offered the barest semblance of an education. He was angry about child labor, children often less than 10 years old who were sent to do hard manual labor in factories and in coal mines. He was angry at Victorian England's refusal to take notice. Most of all, he was angry at people like Scrooge, people who ignored the poverty around them. Dickens' friends urged him to write a political pamphlet about poverty, but he had a better idea. He would create, he said, a sledgehammer that would come down with 20 times the force of a political pamphlet. The sledgehammer Dickens created was A Christmas Carol, and that's what it still is today. Back now to Christmas Eve, the 7th anniversary of the death of Scrooge's partner, Jacob Marley. Scrooge is going home, and he's about to begin the longest night of his life.
Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and having read all the newspapers and beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker's book, went home to bed. He lived in chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner. They were a gloomy suite of rooms and a lowering pile of building up a yard. The building was old enough now and dreary enough, for nobody lived in it but Scrooge, the other rooms being all let out as offices. Now, it is a fact that there was nothing at all particular about the knocker on the door of this house, except that it was very large. Also, that Scrooge had seen it night and morning during his whole residence in this place. Also, that Scrooge had as little of what is called fancy about him as any man in the city of London. And yet Scrooge having his key in the lock of the door, saw in the knocker, without its undergoing any intermediate process of change, not a knocker, but Marley's face.
Marley's face. The dismal light about it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. It was not angry or ferocious, but it looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up upon his ghostly forehead. As Scrooge looked fixedly at this phenomenon, it was a knocker again. He said, "Pooh," and closed the door with a bang.
The sound resounded through the house like thunder. Every room in the house and every cask in the wine merchant's cellars below appeared to have a separate peal of echoes its own. Scrooge was not a man to be frightened of echoes. He fastened the door and walked across the hall and up the steps, slowly too, trimming his candle as he went. Up Scrooge went, not caring a button for its being very dark. Darkness is cheap. Scrooge liked it. But before he shut his heavy door, he walked through his rooms to see that all was right. He had just enough recollection of the face to desire to do that. Quite satisfied, he closed his door and locked himself in. Double locked himself in, which was not his custom. Thus secured against surprise, he took off his cravat, put on his dressing gown and slippers and his nightcap, and sat down before the very low fire to take his gruel. As he threw back his head in the chair, his glance happened to rest upon a bell, a disused bell, that hung in the room. It was with great astonishment and with a strange, inexplicable dread that as he looked, he saw this bell begin to swing. Soon it rang out loudly, and so did every bell in the house. This was succeeded by a clanking noise deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine merchant's cellar. Then he heard the noise much louder on the floors below, then coming up the stairs, then coming straight towards his door. It came on through the heavy door, and a specter passed into the room before his very eyes.
The same face, the very same. Marley, in his pigtailed, usual waistcoat, tights and boots. The chain he drew was clasped about his middle. It was long and wound about him like a tail. It was made of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge could see the two buttons on his coat behind. Scrooge had often heard it said that Marley had no bowels. He had not believed it until now.
No, nor did he believe it even now, though he looked the phantom through and through and saw it standing before him, though he felt the chilling influence of its death-cold eyes, and noticed the very texture of the folded kerchief about its head and chin, he was still incredulous.
How now? What do you want with me?
Much.
Marley's voice, no doubt about it. Who are you?
Ask me who I was.
Who were you then?
In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley.
Can you sit down?
I can.
Do it then. Scrooge asked the question because he didn't know whether the ghost so transparent might find himself in addition to take his chair, but the ghost sat down on the opposite side of the fireplace, as if he were quite used to it.
You don't believe in me?
I don't.
What evidence would you of my reality beyond your senses?
I don't know.
Why do you doubt your senses?
Because a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheats. You might be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of underdone potato. There's more of gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are.
Scrooge was not so much in the habit of cracking jokes, nor did he feel in his heart by any means waggish then. The truth is that he tried to be smart as a means of distracting his own attention and keeping down his horror. But how much greater was his horror when the phantom, taking off the bandage round its head as if it were too warm to wear indoors, its lower jaw dropped down upon its breast.
I see. Dreadful apparition, Why do you trouble me? Why do spirits walk the earth? And why do they come to me?
It is required of every man that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men and travel far and wide. And if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. It is doomed to wander through the world, woe is me, and witness what it cannot share, but might have shared on earth and turn to happiness.
You're fettered. Tell me why.
I wear the chain I forged in life. I made it link by link and yard by yard. I girded it of my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it. Is its pattern strange to you? Or would you know the weight and length of the coil you bear yourself? It was as heavy and as full and as long as this 7 Christmas Eves ago. You have labored on it since. It is a ponderous chain. I am here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance and hope of escaping my fate, a chance and hope of my procuring Ebenezer.
You always were a friend to me, thank you.
You will be haunted by 3 spirits.
Is that the chance and hope you mentioned, Jacob? I think I'd rather not.
Without these visits, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow when the bell tolls 1.
Couldn't I take them all at once and have it over, Jacob?
Expect the second on the next night at the same hour. The third upon the next night when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more, and look that for your own sake you remember what has passed between us. When it had said these words, the spectre took its wrapper from the table and bound it round its head as before. Scrooge knew this by the smart sound its teeth made when the jaws were brought together by the bandage. He ventured to raise his eyes again and found his supernatural visitor confronting him in an erect attitude with its chain wound over and about its arm. The apparition walked backwards from him, and at every step it took, the window raised itself a little so that when the spectre reached it, it was wide open. It beckoned Scrooge to approach, which he did. When they were within 2 paces of each other, Marley's ghost held up his hand, warning him to come no nearer. Scrooge stopped, not so much in obedience as in surprise and fear. For on the raising of the hand, he seemed sensible of confused noises in the air, incoherent sounds of lamentation and regret, inexpressibly sorrowful and self-accusatory. The spectre, after listening for a while, joined in the mournful dirge and floated out upon the bleak, dark night.
Dickens was something of a connoisseur of ghosts and the supernatural. He used to attend seances and table-rapping sessions. But he may have been a bit controversial in assigning Marley's ghost to chains. As one expert wrote, dragging chains is not the fashion of English ghosts. Dead or alive, English spirits are free. Dickens knew a great deal about magic. He was an expert conjurer, always in demand to perform at children's parties. If you could see me, he wrote to a friend, burning pocket handkerchiefs without hurting him, you'd never forget it as long as you live. So now we meet the first of the 3 spirits that come to haunt Ebenezer Scrooge, the ghost of Christmas past. This is how John Leech, the illustrator of the original edition of A Christmas Carol, imagined him. He's old, it seems, but with a childlike face. There's light coming from the top of his head, and it fluctuates so that sometimes Scrooge can see the head, but not the body, sometimes the body, but not the head. Very ghostly. This is the spirit who takes Scrooge back through the years to his lonely childhood and reminds him of some of the people who were good to him, people who held out the hand of friendship to an awkward, solitary boy when he needed it most, like his old prentice master, Mr. Fezziwig. The spirit arrives just as Marley's ghost had said it would, on the stroke of one.
Are you the spirit, sir, whose coming was foretold to me?
I am.
Who and what are you?
I am the ghost of Christmas past.
Long past?
No, your past. The things that you will see with me are shadows of the things that have been. They will have no consciousness of us. Rise and walk with me.
It would have been in vain for Scrooge to plead the weather and the hour were not adapted to pedestrian purposes. He rose, but finding that the spirit lay towards the window, clasped its robe in supplication. I am mortal and am liable to fall.
Bear but a touch of my hand there, and you shall be upheld in more than this. As the words were spoken, they passed through the wall and stood in the busy thoroughfares of a city. It was plain enough by the dressing of the shops that here, too, it was Christmas time. The ghost stopped at a certain warehouse door and asked Scrooge if he knew it.
No, I was apprenticed here.
They went in. At the sight of an old gentleman in a Welsh wig sitting behind such a high desk that if he had been 2 inches taller, he might have knocked his head against the ceiling, Scrooge cried out in great amazement,
Why, it's old Fezziwig. Bless his heart, it's Fezziwig alive again.
Old Fezziwig laid down his pen and looked up at the clock, which pointed to the hour of 7. He rubbed his hands, adjusted his capacious waistcoat, laughed all over himself, from his shoes to his organ of benevolence, and called out in a comfortable, oily, rich, fat, jovial voice, Yo-ho there, Ebenezer, Dick! A living and moving picture of Scrooge's former self, a young man came briskly in, accompanied by his fellow apprentice.
Dick Wilkins, to be sure. Bless me, yes, there he is. He was very much attached to me, was Dick. Poor Dick, dear.
Oh ho, my boys, no more work tonight. Christmas Eve, Dick, Christmas, Ebenezer. Clear away, lads, and let's have lots of room here.
Clear away. There was nothing they wouldn't have cleared away or couldn't have cleared away with old Fezziwig looking on. It was done in a minute. Every movable was packed off. The floor was swept and watered. The lamps were trimmed. The fuel was heaped upon the fire. And the warehouse was as snug and warm and bright and dry a ballroom as you would desire to see on a winter's night.
In came a fiddler with a music book and went up to the lofty desk and made an orchestra of it and tuned like 50 stomach aches.
In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast, substantial smile. In came 3 Miss Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable. In came 6 young followers, whose hearts they broke. In came all the young men and women employed in the business.
In they all came, one after another, some shyly, some boldly, some gracefully, some awkwardly, some pushing, some pulling. In they all came, anyhow and everyhow.
And away they went, 20 couples at once, down the middle and up again. Old top couple always turning up in the wrong place, new top couple starting off again as soon as they got there, all top couples at last, and not a bottom one to help them.
When this result was brought about, old Fezziwig clapped his hands to stop the dance, and the fiddler plunged his hot face into a pot of porter especially provided for that purpose.
There were more dances, and there were more forfeits, and more dances, and there was cake, and there was a great piece of cold roast, and there was a great piece of cold boiled, and there were mince pies and plenty of beer.
But the great effect of the evening came after the roast and the broiled, when the fiddler, an artful dog, mind you, the sort of man who knew his business better than you or I could have told it to him, struck up Sir Roger de Coverley.
Then old Fezziwig stood out to dance with Mrs. Fezziwig, top couple too, with a good stiff piece of work cut out for them. 3 or 24 pair of partners, people who were not to be trifled with, people who would dance and who had no notion of walking.
But if they had been twice as many, 4 times, old Fezziwig would have been a match for them, and so would Mrs. Fezziwig.
When the clock struck 11, this domestic ball broke up, and Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took their stations, one on either side of the door, and shaking hands with every person individually as he or she went out, wished him or her a Merry Christmas.
And when everyone had retired but the 2 apprentices, they did the same to them. And thus the cheerful voices died away, and the lads were left to their beds, which were under the counter in the back shop.
During the whole of this time, Scrooge has acted like a man out of his wits. His heart and soul were in the scene. And with his former self, he corroborated everything, remembered everything, enjoyed everything, and underwent the strangest agitation. It was not until now, when the bright faces of his former self and Dick were turned away from him, that he remembered the ghost and became conscious of that ghost was looking full upon him, while the light upon his head burned very clear. The ghost spoke to him.
A small matter to make these silly folks so full of gratitude.
Small?
Why is it not? He has spent but a few pounds of your mortal money, 3 or 4 perhaps. Is that so much that he deserves this praise?
It isn't that, Spirit. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. Say that his power lies in words and looks, in things so slight and insignificant that it is impossible to count them up. What then? The happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune.
So what's the matter?
Nothing particular.
Something, I think?
No. I should like to be able to say a word or two to my clerk just now, that's all.
This is where Charles Dickens lived a part of his own childhood. Dreadful, lonely, desperate years which he never forgot. Number 16 Bayham Street in Camden Town. Dickens' father, John, was a clerk in the Navy Pay Office, a comfortable enough position, but he lost the job. When the family arrived in Bayham Street, quite gentrified today, young Charles had to be taken out of school. 2 days after his 12th birthday, he was sent to work in a shoe polish factory on the north bank of the River Thames. Each day, he walked 3 miles from Camden Town to Warren's blacking factory. He worked a 10-hour day, and he walked 3 miles home through the dark and dangerous streets. In later life, Dickens could never remember how long he spent in that rat-infested hellhole. It may have been as little as a year, but he never forgot it, and he never forgave. There was something even worse. His father was imprisoned for debt in this grim place, the Marshalsea, on the south bank of the Thames. And it was 12-year-old Charles who visited him and ran his errands, pawning family possessions to raise money, pleading with friends and relatives to help get his father released. Dickens made bitter but effective use of those dreadful experiences in his novels. Fagin's Loft in Oliver Twist is based on the blacking factory. Mr. Micawber is imprisoned in the Marshalsea in David Copperfield. And here in A Christmas Carol, he makes use of the house in Bayham Street. It becomes the home of Scrooge's downtrodden clerk, Bob Cratchit. So, after the ghost of Christmas Past, Scrooge is visited by the second of the 3 spirits, the ghost of Christmas Present. And this isn't a frightening ghost at all. A jolly giant, Dickens calls him, an enormous, overgrown schoolboy who takes Scrooge through the streets of London to Camden Town. There he will witness the Cratchits' Christmas dinner. Bob Cratchit and his wife have 6 children. The youngest of them, Tiny Tim, has his legs in irons and is supported on crutches. The Cratchits can't afford a turkey for Christmas dinner, but they do have a goose.
There never was such a goose. Bob said he didn't believe there ever was such a goose cooked. Its tenderness and flavor, size and cheapness were the themes of universal admiration. Eked out by the applesauce and mashed potatoes, it was a significant dinner for the whole family. Indeed, as Mrs. Cratchit said with great delight, surveying one small atom of a bone upon the dish, they hadn't ate it all at last. Yet everyone had had enough, and the youngest Cratchits in particular were steeped in sage and onions up to their eyebrows. But now the plates being changed by Miss Belinda, Mrs. Cratchit left the room alone, too nervous to bear witness, to take the pudding up and bring it in. Suppose it should not be done enough. Suppose it should break in turning out. Suppose somebody should have got over the wall of the backyard and stolen it while they were merry with the goose. A supposition at which the two young Cratchits became livid. All sorts of horrors were supposed. Hallo! A great deal of steam. The pudding was out of the copper. The smell like washing day. That was the cloth. A smell like an eating house and a pastry cook's next door with a laundress's next door to that. That was the pudding. In half a minute, Mrs. Cratchit entered, flushed but smiling proudly, with the pudding like a speckled cannonball, hard and firm, blazing in half a quartern of ignited brandy, and bedight with Christmas holly stuck in the top. A wonderful pudding. Bob Cratchit said, and calmly too, that he regarded it as the greatest success achieved by Mrs. Cratchit since their marriage. Mrs. Cratchit said now that the weight was off her mind, she would confess she had had her doubts about the quantity of flour. Everyone had something to say about it, but nobody said or thought it was at all a small pudding for such a large family. It would have been heresy to do so. Any Cratchit would have blushed to think of such a thing. At last the dinner was all done. The cloth was cleared, the hearth swept, and the fire made up. The compound in the jug being tasted and considered perfect, apples and oranges were put upon the table, and a shovelful of chestnuts on the fire. Then all the Cratchit family drew round the hearth in what Bob Cratchit called a circle, meaning half a one, and at Bob Cratchit's elbow stood the family display of glass, 2 tumblers and a custard cup without a handle. These held the hot stuff from the jug, however, as well as golden goblets would have done, and Bob served it out with beaming looks, while the chestnuts on the fire sputtered and crackled noisily. Then Bob proposed the toast. "A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us," which all the family re-echoed, Tiny Tim last of all. God bless us, everyone. Tiny Tim sat very close to his father's side upon his little stool. Bob held his withered little hand in his, as if he loved the child and wished to keep him by his side and dreaded that he might be taken from him.
Spirit, tell me if Tiny Tim will live.
I see a vacant seat in the poor chimney corner and a crutch without an owner carefully preserved. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, the child would die.
No, oh no, kind Spirit. Say he will be spared.
If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, none other of my race will find him here. What then? If he be like to die, he had better do it and decrease the surplus population.
Scrooge hung his head to hear his own words quoted by the Spirit, and was overcome with penitence and grief.
Man, if man you be in heart, not adamant, forbear that wicked cant until you have discovered what the surplus is and where it is. Will you decide what men shall live, what men shall die? It may be that in the sight of heaven you are more worthless and less fit to live than millions like this poor man's child. Oh God, to hear the insect on the leaf pronouncing on the too much life among his hungry brothers in the dust.
Scrooge bent before the ghost's rebuke, and trembling cast his eyes upon the ground, but raised them speedily on hearing his own name. Another toast from Bob Cratchit.
Mr. Scrooge, I give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast. The founder of the feast, indeed, said Mrs. Cratchit, reddening. I wish I had him here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feed upon, and I hope he'd have a good appetite for it. My dear, said Bob, the children, Christmas Day. It should be Christmas Day, I am sure, said Mrs. Cratchit, on which one drinks the health of such an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man as Mr. Scrooge. You know he is, Robert. No one knows it better than you do, poor dear. My dear, Christmas Day. I'll drink his health for your sake and the day's, said Mrs. Cratchit, not for him. Long life to him, a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. He'll be very merry and very happy, I have no doubt. The children drank the toast after her. It was the first of their proceedings which had no heartiness in it. Tiny Tim drank last of all, but he didn't care a tuppence for it. Scrooge was the ogre of the family. The mention of his name cast a dark shadow on the family, which was not dispelled for full 5 minutes.
That goose the Cratchits had for dinner, it probably cost a whole week's wage. So how did Bob afford it? Well, the Cratchits would have belonged to the Goose Club, as many poor families did. Each week they subscribed a few pennies to the club so that at Christmas they could claim their goose. Christmas Day in Dickens' time was a family day, above all, a day for eating. But it wasn't an automatic holiday. Bob Cratchit had to ask Scrooge for the day off. It was certainly a time for parties like the Fezziwig Ball. There were dances and children's games like Blind Man's Buff and decorations. England was just beginning to import certain customs from Holland and Germany. St. Nicholas was becoming familiar as Santa Claus. And the Christmas tree was becoming a feature of seasonal decorations. Carol singing, of course, was centuries old. But something new was happening. The year A Christmas Carol appeared, so did the first commercially produced Christmas card. And this is it. All his life, Dickens had a passion for Christmas. A passion that began, perhaps, in the first 8 Christmases of his life. Every one of them a white Christmas, with snow upon the ground. An extraordinary sequence for the usually damp and mild English climate. So now we come to the last of the 3 spirits to visit Scrooge, but it's the most dreadful. The ghost of Christmas yet to come seemed to scatter gloom and mystery, Dickens writes. It was shrouded in a deep black garment which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible save one outstretched hand. And this is the ghost who takes Scrooge on his most frightening journey, a journey to some events that will surely come to pass if Scrooge does not reform his ways. They pass a corpse lying on a bed. Is it the dead body of Scrooge himself? Surely not, pleads Scrooge. They return to the Cratchits' house in Camden Town, where Tiny Tim has died. His body lies upstairs. He'll be buried on Sunday.
Quiet, very quiet. The noisy little Cratchits were as still as statues in one corner and sat looking up at Peter, the oldest boy, who had a book before him. The mother and her daughters were engaged in sewing, but surely they were very quiet. And he took a child and sat him in the midst of them.
Where had Scrooge heard those words? He had not dreamed them. The boy Peter must have read them out as he and the spirit crossed the threshold. Why did he not go on?
Bob came in. His tea was ready for him on the hob, and they all tried who should help him to it most. Then the 2 Cratchits got upon his knees and laid each child a little cheek against his face, as if they said, "Don't mind it, Father. Don't be grieved." Bob was very cheerful with them and spoke pleasantly to all the family. He looked at the work upon the table and praised the industry and speed of Mrs. Cratchit and the girls. They would be done long before Sunday, he said. "Sunday," said Mrs. Cratchit. "You went to the cemetery today then, Robert?" "Yes, my dear. I wish you could have gone. It would have done you good to see how green a place it is, but you'll see it often. I promised him I would walk there on Sunday." My little child. He broke down all at once. He couldn't help it. If he could have helped it, he and his child would have been farther apart perhaps than they were. He left the room and went upstairs into the room above, which was lighted cheerfully and hung with Christmas. There was a chair set beside the child, and there were signs of someone having been there lately. Poor Bob sat down in it, and when he had thought a little and composed himself, he kissed the little face. He was reconciled to what had happened, and then he went back downstairs again, quite happy. They drew about the fire and talked, the girls and mother still working. Bob told them of an extraordinary kindness of Mr. Scrooge's nephew, whom he had scarcely seen but once, and who, meeting him in the street that day and seeing that he looked just a little down, inquired what had happened to distress him. On which, said Bob, for he is the pleasantest spoken gentleman you have ever heard, I told him, I am heartily sorry for it, Mr. Cratchit, he said, and heartily sorry for your good wife. If I can be of any service to you in any way, and he gave me his card, that's where I live, pray come to me. Now it wasn't, cried Bob, for the sake of anything he might be able to do for us, so much as for his kind way, that this was quite delightful. It really felt as if he had known our Tiny Tim and felt with us. I'm sure he's a good soul, said Mrs. Cratchit. You would be surer of it, my dear, returned Bob, if you saw and spoke to him. I shouldn't be at all surprised, mark what I say, if he got Peter a better situation. Only hear that, Peter, said Mrs. Cratchit. And then, cried one of the girls, Peter will be keeping company with someone and setting up for himself. Get along with you, retorted Peter, grinning. It's just as likely as not, said Bob. One of these days, though there's plenty of time for that, my dear. But however and whenever we part from one another, I am sure we shall none of us forget poor Tiny Tim, shall we? Or this first parting that there was among us? And I know, my dears, that when we recollect how patient and how mild he was, although he was but a little child, we shall not quarrel easily among ourselves and forget poor Tiny Tim in doing it.
Inspector, something informs me that our parting moment is at hand. I know it, but I know not how. Tell me what man that was with a covered face whom we saw lying dead before we came here?
Instead, the ghost of Christmas yet to come conveyed him to a dismal, wretched, ruinous churchyard. The spirit stood among the graves and pointed down to one.
Before I draw nearer to that stone to which you point, said Scrooge, answer me one question. Are these the shadows of the things that will be, or are they the shadows of things that may be only?
Still the ghost pointed downward to the grave by which it stood.
Men's courses will foreshadow certain ends, to which, if persevered in, they will lead. They must lead, but if the courses be departed from, the ends will change. Say it is thus with what you show me.
The spirit was immovable as ever. Scrooge crept towards it, trembling as he went, and following the finger, read upon the stone of the neglected grave his own name.
Ebenezer Scrooge. Am I that man that lay upon the bed?
The finger pointed from the grave to him and back again.
No, Spirit, no.
The finger was still there.
Spirit, hear me. I am not the man I was. I will not be the man I must have been. Why show me this if I am past all hope? Assure me that I may yet change those shadows that you've shown me by an altered life. I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach. Oh, tell me that I may sponge away the writing on this stone.
Holding up his hands in a last prayer to have his fate reversed, Scrooge saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost. Yes! And the bedpost was his own. The bed was his own. The room was his own. Best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own to make amends in. Scrooge was checked in his transports by the churches ringing out the lustiest peals he had ever heard. Running to the window, he opened it and put out his head. No fog, no mist, no night, clear, bright, stirring, golden day.
What's today? Scrooge called down to a boy dressed in Sunday clothes.
Eh?
What's today, my fine fellow?
What? Today is Christmas Day.
It's Christmas Day. I haven't missed it. The spirits have done all this in one night. They can do anything they like. Of course they can. Hello, my fine fellow. Do you know the poulterers in the next street but one at the corner?
I should hope I do.
An intelligent boy, a remarkable boy. Do you know whether they've sold the prize turkey that was hanging in the window there? Not the little prize turkey, but the big one.
What, the one as big as me?
What a delightful boy. It's a pleasure to talk to you. Yes, my buck. That's the one.
Oh, he's hanging there now.
Is it? Go buy it then.
Walker!
No, I'm in earnest. Go and buy it and tell them to bring it here. Come back with the man, and I'll give you a shilling. Come back within less than 5 minutes, I'll give you a half-crown.
The boy was off like a shot.
I'll send it to Bob Cratchit. He shall know who sends it.
The hand in which he wrote the address was not a steady one, but write it he did somehow, and went downstairs to open the street door, ready for the coming of the poulterer's man. It was a turkey. It never could have stood upon its legs, that bird. It would have snapped them short off in a minute. He dressed himself all in his best, and at last got out into the streets. The people were by this time pouring forth, as he had seen them with the ghost of Christmas present. And walking with his hands behind him, Scrooge regarded every one with a delighted smile. He looked so irresistibly pleasant in a word that 3 or 4 good-natured fellows said, "Good morning, sir. A Merry Christmas to you."
And Scrooge said often afterwards that of all the blithe sounds he'd ever heard, those were the blithest in his ears.
In the afternoon, he turned his footsteps toward his nephew's house. He passed the door a dozen times before he had the courage to go up and knock. "Well, bless my soul," cried Fred. "Who's that?"
It's I, your Uncle Scrooge. I've come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred?
Let him in. It's a mercy he didn't shake his arm off. He was at home in 5 minutes. Nothing could have been heartier. Wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful unanimity, wonderful happiness.
But Scrooge was early at the office next morning. Oh, he was early there. If he could only be there first to catch Bob Cratchit coming late. That was the thing he set his heart on, and he did it. The clock struck 9, no Bob. 1:15, no Bob. Bob was full 18 minutes and a half behind his time. "Hello," growled Scrooge in his accustomed voice, as near as he could feign it. "What do you mean by coming here at this time of the day?"
I am very sorry, sir. I am behind my time.
You are? Yes, I think you are. Step this way, if you please.
Oh, it's only once a year, sir. It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir.
Now, I'll tell you what. I'm not going to stand for this sort of thing any longer. And therefore, I am about to raise your salary.
Bob trembled and got a little nearer to the ruler. He had a momentary idea of knocking Scrooge down with it and holding him and calling to the people in the court for help.
A Merry Christmas, Bob. A Merrier Christmas, my good fellow, not given you in many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavor to assist your struggling family. We'll discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop, Bob. Make the fires and buy a second coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit.
Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but his own heart laughed, and that was quite enough for him.
Scrooge had no further intercourse with the spirits, and it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well, if any man possessed the knowledge. May that be truly said of us and all of us.
And so, as Tiny Tim observed,
God bless us, everyone.
Funding for Bah Humbug is provided by the Sherman Fairchild Foundation, Betty Wolfe Johnson, and by the agents and employees of New York Life, who are proud to sponsor this evening's celebration of Dickens' Christmas classic. May you keep Christmas well. From all of us at New York Life, the company you keep.